Hi friends, so today is the 9th of December 2025 and that means that I've been drawing every day for 2 years. I wanted to make this video to share what I've learned during my second year, as my first year video was really well received. I won't be going over all the details, just the most important stuff, and like last year, here's a list with timestamps if you don't want to hear me yap. One of the things that really bothered me at the end of my first year was that I had gotten used to copying references instead of learning from them. I wasn't really thinking about what the people using them look for or why they emphasize certain guidelines. In other words, I found it difficult to translate the guidelines and shapes that I see Nikojira and Leviathan using into something that is coherent for me. I admire their drawings, and these approaches obviously work, so there must be something to them. But I am not them, and so my goal for this second year was to better understand what guidelines and shapes make sense to me, and how do I use them to draw more freely. I had noticed that different people will notice different things and use guidelines based off their own observation, even if a tutorial shows what seems to be a surefire way to draw a certain thing. It led me to believe that others can tell me what visual cues they look for, but ultimately, what makes sense to me is a discovery that I'll have to make by studying and drawing it myself. At the start of my second year, this belief led me to discover connection points, as I noticed in my references that there are certain landmarks on the torso that always stick out to me, even when others don't emphasize the same ones. While there will be natural variety in human bodies that affect the lines between these landmarks, I was trying to establish a sort of foundation body that I can always refer back to. I had the idea that I can stretch and alter the foundation body to fit the actual body type that I need, though I have yet to test this properly, so I'm not sure if this will work. While looking for how my favorite artists might be using connection points, I discovered that Nikojira had recently released a drawing course that actually covers the topic of applying shape design to anatomy. It took me a while, but by day 467, I had saved up enough to purchase Nikojira's drawing course, and so I did. Nikojira changed how I approach my references, as he showcases how he breaks down reference into simple forms. It allows him to more easily adjust the proportions and fix mistakes before committing to more subtle curves. I did find this approach to be most effective in digital drawing, but I also tried using it in my sketchbook, where drawing very lightly got me a very similar result. Another aspect that really stuck with me was Nikojira's emphasis on using C, S, and I curves both when sketching and in his final line work. While I was practicing gestures, this constraint on my lines made me slow down and put more trust in my abilities. It also forced me to use my entire arm, which I have had difficulties getting used to, but it is slowly becoming second nature to me. I tried applying what I had learned from Nikojira, but noticed that even though I was breaking down the muscles into simple forms, it wasn't helping me draw the arms more freely. And so, taking inspiration from this video by Vale, I combined my gesture drawing with applying shape design to anatomy. On day 945, this change in approach led me to discover that I hadn't really tried practicing one specific shape for more than a week. I tend to notice something new while I'm studying, and then I drop what I was originally doing and start exploring what I found. This, paired with my tendency to spend most of my time not really looking at the reference, meant that I often ended up drawing what I imagined a skull should look like, and then got confused when my drawing wasn't like the reference. In other words, I needed more structure, and so I planned a 2-week experiment where I used 2-minute intervals for 20 minutes, drawing the skull from different angles using this 3D model. After the 2 weeks, I was honestly very surprised at how well it had worked for me. The 2-minute intervals forced me to draw in larger shapes first, and also made me use the relationships between the nose bridge and the orbits to align everything else correctly. And on day 538, I used this same approach to try again with studying arms. I noticed that for guidelines, drawing the bones as boxes and then building around them made drawing arms a lot more comprehensible to me. I also picked up a fun tip from the Art Help Discord community, which is to start by drawing bodybuilders, as their muscles have very clear shape language, making it just that bit easier for me to read the shapes. I feel that all of my efforts really shines through on day 595, where, without a reference, I drew the prettiest torsos that I have ever made. I'm sure there is room for improvement, but for once, and for these drawings specifically, improvement can wait. On day 600, I did another comparison drawing, and I was honestly very disappointed with the result. It really felt like I had gotten worse over the past 100 days, as I had focused so much on the torso that I hadn't really given myself time to draw my favorite characters. One of the major issues that I still have today is that I'm very bad at communicating the likeness of a character. I did try to solve this in a bit of a cheeky way by drawing an original character, because I can more freely change their appearance and no one's going to notice. However, running away like that didn't solve how frustrated I felt. And so, during the last part of my second year, I focused on improving the likeness and the accuracy of my drawings. The first major change came when I discovered Jake Don't Draw's deep dive into classical portrait drawing, as Jake presents the importance of construction and proportion and how it's all being held together by form. He also introduced me to a study method called Cutouts, where I would isolate a specific part of the head, such as the eye, and then focus solely on drawing that eye as accurately as possible. Additionally, to understand the forms better, I also added contour lines, since I have yet to practice shadow and light, and really, I still just kind of guess where the shadows go. And so, on day 660, I redrew the same reference of Miss Nagatoro that I had also used in my first year. It made me very happy to see that, for the first time during this entire journey, I genuinely felt that I had direct proof of my own improvement, as I brought her likeness that much closer to the manga compared to last year. Thanks to Jake, I also started shifting away from using stylized references into using photos of real people. I still lack the skills to communicate the likeness of a real person accurately, and while it would have been nice to dive right into it, on day 684, my drawing hand went numb. To call it an injury would definitely be an overstatement. It was much closer to an injury waiting to happen, making the numbness and the pain in my wrist a wake-up call for me to stop and rest. I had been overexerting my wrist for months, causing daily strain, likely from using worn-down pencils that forced my hand into very cramped positions. With guidance from my doctor, I bought new pencils and I started doing daily stretching aimed at the wrist and fingers. I also started wearing a wrist brace at night, which helps me ease the pain. So, a reminder to anyone who draws: if your wrist or your fingers start to hurt, please stop immediately, they need rest. I was a little silly and kept drawing during the time that I should have been resting. I did limit myself to 10 minutes of drawing per day. The silver lining in all of this is that being forced to rest made me stop and think about drawing, as it also gave me time to watch videos by Peter Han, by Hank Green, PCAT, and most importantly, Broken Draw. The main thing I realized is that, to me, drawing is very much a craft that's similar to woodworking. When I see a cool piece of art from someone like Udon531 or Nikojira, what makes me fall in love with their work is mostly my obsession with how they made it. Being upfront about it, I don't really trust art that hides its own process. My reflections were all summed up very neatly with a quote from Broken Draw stating that if you can't draw it as it is, then it's not your art style, it's your crutch. I like reading the quote as saying that the better I become at drawing what I see accurately, the more freedom I'll have to choose how I want to interpret it later on. And so, I spent the last days of my second year with Broken Draw's free book and relaxing by just drawing what I like instead of active practice. Which brings us to today, the 9th of December, 2025. The biggest difference this year was creating a study structure that is tailored to my current attention span. If one takes the structure I proposed one-to-one, then I'm pretty certain that it's not going to work as well as I've shown in this video. My suspicion stems from the core idea that you need to tailor any structure to your current attention span and understanding. Copying a study structure one-to-one is a great departure point, but in my experience, it should be kept open for personalized changes. Instead of going for, I must do 2-minute intervals for 20 minutes, try keeping the structure more flexible. If you sense that 2-minute intervals for drawing your study subject is too little or too much, then try changing the intervals to 1 minute or 3 minutes. Or maybe you sense something else is overwhelming you in the study. For example, with the skull, I originally removed the jaw and only studied the upper part because I already had a lot of difficulty getting the orbits and the nose bone to be coherent. Having to add the jaw to something that I barely understood was simply too overwhelming at the time. But as I made more drawings, I started to notice the relationships between different aspects of the skull. Using these relationships slowly made it easier for me to make corrections without becoming disengaged, not only with the skull itself, but with drawing in general. In other words, my experience is that as skill grows, so does attention span, which also make drawing a lot more enjoyable to me. While it's not entirely true, the idea that everything is forms was very helpful in figuring out how I can draw more freely. There are 5 core shapes that I stick to, and with these, I should be able to formulate the structure of any object observationally or through imagination. As Peter Han puts it, drawing is a language spoken through form. So, instead of drawing an object such as a tape measure, just like I see it, it feels much more helpful to practice drawing the core shapes that make up the tape measure and then trying my best to reflect the proportions accurately through the core shapes. Like what Nikojira does, this also allows me to adjust the proportions before I commit to them, and it allows me to see what a tape measure is made of. Additionally, I really like doing what's called morphing, where I find things that use the same or at least very similar core shapes. As an example, the thickness of a tape measure is the same as a pencil sharpener, and the button on the tape measure looks a lot like the front of a motorcycle. Because of this, I don't really need to know exactly what a pencil sharpener looks like, since the core shapes from the tape measure can be used to create the pencil sharpener as well. Excuse the interruption. While I was editing, I felt the point that I'm trying to make in this section wasn't very clear. What I tried to say is that while copying is an effective way to improve your drawings, you don't learn much if you just repeat patterns, and this extends to how you study as well. Therefore, you should use different studying and copying methods depending on your level of understanding and concentration. Each method has its own strength and limitations, making it important to alternate repeatedly. I say this because I noticed that this motion is what I was trying to describe because it helped me understand and depict forms better, giving me more comprehensive skills that I am able to apply when drawing today. That's all, back to the video. This leads me to the last point from my second year. When I was learning to draw the head, I used a 3D model for the skull. I traveled to Glyptoteket in Copenhagen to observe and study the antique statues in person. I also started feeling out my own face, checking if the edges of my eyes and the start of my ears align as a guideline. I joined a drawing club and I got feedback on Discord. I did cutout studies and I would also be using models from Halftone, and I also recently made this little styrofoam head inspired by Chomang. The point is that I find it so much easier to remember and to apply novel information, such as where the eyeballs sit inside of the skull, if I get to process that information in multiple different ways. It means that I don't just draw different references or use different tutorials. I am purposely looking for both abstract and concrete representations of the face. All of this combined creates a more elaborated and detailed memory in my head from the different experiences and senses I've had to use, even if it all still boils down to observing and then drawing. I also noticed that the variety in my experiences have enhanced my long-term retention of the individual parts of the face. Now, all that's left for me is to figure out how I put it together. And that's 2 entire years. I hope you enjoyed it. I plan to keep making these yearly recaps here on YouTube, but will mainly just stick to posting on my bi-monthly blog, Sketchbook Journey, over on Planet Minecraft. If you're watching this on Planet Minecraft, then thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. But if you're on YouTube, then please stick around for 1 more minute. I didn't expect the first year video to blow up like it did, and much less did I anticipate all of the comments it would get. I want to thank all of you who left a comment on last year's video, as I genuinely love talking to others about drawing and learning from you as well. Speaking of learning, I want to thank a few specific comments that helped me in more subtle ways make progress this year. J.H. Perro talked about building fluency, which sparked the idea in my head that I should think of drawing more like visual communication or a visual language, making me slowly replace parts of the textual notes with visual explainers. So thank you. Lord Vance and Yavon both helped me solidify that making copies is great for proportion studies, but it's not going to teach me much about drawing freely. I am no longer as reliant on copying as I was in my first year, partially thanks to YouTube pointing it out. So, thanks to both of you. Vandercool and Wibblesop gave me the idea to make a physical scrapbook with all of the stuff and the references that I like. While you did recommend making a digital folder, I found that having to choose what to spend money on printing helps me narrow down the stuff that I like better than all else, even when it's not drawing related. So, thanks to both of you as well. And lastly, to all of you who last year mentioned that you're on a journey learning to draw, I would love to hear from all of you again. Did you figure something out since last year? And how are you feeling about it? Regardless of your level, thank you for sharing your experiences in the comments. It really does help me keep working on these videos while battling my declining health. I hope this video inspires you to go draw, and let's have another great year of drawing.